The dining room of Aubergine, Toronto's most deliberately understated fine dining institution, carried the kind of silence that money buys, not the absence of sound, but the careful suppression of anything too loud, too honest, too real. Nora Callahan moved through it the way she moved through everything these days. Efficiently, invisibly, with the practiced grace of someone who had learned that the less space you took up, the fewer questions people asked. She lifted a water goblet from the sideboard and held it briefly to the light, a faint smudge near the rim. She polished it away with the corner of her cloth, set it down without a sound, and smoothed the front of her apron with both hands. Table 7 would be seated in 4 minutes. She knew because she had counted. She always counted. Old habit. At 31, Nora had the kind of face that people found difficult to place, not because she was forgettable, but because she was precise. Sharp grey eyes that catalogued everything quietly. A mouth that smiled at exactly the right moments and gave nothing away in between. Her dark hair was pulled back the way the restaurant required. Though a single strand had come loose near her left ear, she didn't fix it. There were more important things. There were always more important things. Her mother's appointment was Thursday. The oncologist at Princess Margaret had a cancellation, and Nora had spent 45 minutes on hold to secure it. She'd written the time on a sticky note above the kitchen sink at home. Not because she would forget, but because her mother would check it 17 times before Thursday came. Some things were worth the redundancy. Table 7 arrived at 7:14. Nora heard them before she saw them. The particular quality of their entrance cut through the room's careful atmosphere. Footsteps that assumed the floor had been waiting for them. She turned from the sideboard and took them in with the speed of long practice. 4 men. Suits that cost more than her monthly rent. The kind of confidant that doesn't need to announce itself but does anyway. The one in front was Mitchell Hale. She recognized him the way most Canadians in a certain professional circle would. From the business pages, from the occasional spots on BNN Bloomberg, from the profile in Toronto Life 6 months ago that had called him the most important voice in Canadian tech investment since the dot-com era. He was 44, with the face of someone who had decided at some point in his 30s that effort was beneath him. Good bone structure going slightly to waste, a jaw that led every room he walked into. He scanned the dining room the way a man scans a space he is about to own. His gaze passed over Nora without stopping. She was used to that. "Mr. Hale," she said, approaching the table as the 4 men settled. "Welcome to Aubergine. My name is Nora. I'll be taking care of you this evening." She set menus before each of them with a motion so practiced it bordered on choreography. "May I start you with still or sparkling water?" Hale didn't look up from his phone. "Sparkling. And we'll need the Montrachet. The 2018, not the 2019. The 2019 is a guest wine." He said it the way a person says something they've said many times and have long since stopped expecting to be understood. "Of course," Nora said. "The Domaine Leflaive, 2018. Excellent choice." He looked up then, briefly, the kind of glance that assesses and dismisses in a single movement. "Good," he said, and looked back at his phone. The dinner moved the way dinners like this always moved, in courses, in negotiations, in the language of men performing ease for one another. Nora listened without appearing to listen, which was a skill she had developed long before she ever tied on an apron. She learned it in lecture halls, in seminar rooms where the quietest person in the room was often the one who understood the most. She had been that person. At Dalhousie, then at McGill, biochemistry with a minor in French literature, because she had been, at 22, someone who believed that the breadth of a person's curiosity said something essential about the breadth of their life. She had planned to go on to graduate school. She had a supervisor lined up at the University of Toronto. She had read the papers, attended the talks, written the emails that made things official. Then her mother's diagnosis arrived, as diagnoses do, without scheduling an appointment first. The lab her mother had worked at for 20 years did not offer long-term disability coverage for contract employees. Nora had not known this until she needed to know it. There were a great many things she had not known until she needed to. She deferred her program for 1 year. Then 2. Then she stopped deferring and started working out the math of what staying actually required. The restaurant paid well enough for what it was. The shifts were long and the clients were occasionally wretched, and the tips on a Saturday night, if the room was full, could cover her mother's supplementary medications for 2 weeks. She had become very good at the math of staying. It was the kind of intelligence that would have been invisible to anyone at table 7. "The halibut," said one of Hale's associates, a younger man, eager in the way that young men around powerful ones often are, "is apparently sourced from somewhere in Nova Scotia, some family operation." "Everything with a story these days," Hale said, setting down his wine glass. "Next it'll be, the Carrots grew up listening to Debussy." The other men laughed. Hale smiled in the way of someone who has delivered a line they already knew was good. Nora arrived to clear the amuse-bouche with the expression she kept specifically for moments like this, pleasant, unreadable, perfectly positioned at the neutral intersection of professional and invisible. "Are you ready for the first course, Mr. Hale, or would you like another moment?" He was already speaking again to the man across from him. Nora waited, the way she had learned to wait, without tension, without impatience, with the absolute economy of someone who has decided that wasted energy is a luxury she cannot afford. "Ready," he said, without completing his sentence first. The first course came and went. The second came and went. Nora navigated the table with the kind of precision that goes entirely unnoticed by those who benefit from it most, which is, she had found rather the point. It was during the main course that the room shifted. One of the men, Garrett, she had gathered from their conversation, a fund manager from Vancouver who laughed half a beat after everyone else, spilled a small amount of burgundy on the tablecloth. A minor thing. Nora was beside the table in seconds, cloth in hand, managing the situation with quiet efficiency. "Careful," Hale said to Garrett, and his voice carried the weariness of a man who finds the incompetence of others both inevitable and deeply tedious. Then he turned to Nora as she worked and said, in a voice meant only for the table, sliding into the kind of casual condescension that requires an audience, though a small one, his hand lifting his wine glass as though the whole thing were incidental, "Quam inutilis mulia est, nec vinum, nec mensum custodia potest." How useless a woman is. She can't manage wine or a table either. It was said in the comfortable register of a man who had used the trick before. The dead language trick. Latin pulled out at cocktail parties, at boardrooms, at power dinners, a private broadcast on a frequency the help couldn't tune into. His associates absorbed it with the mild, practiced amusement of men who understood the game. Nora finished what she was doing. She straightened. She looked at Mitchell Hale for the first time that evening, the way she actually saw him, and not the way she was paid to appear to. And then, in a voice that was measured and unhurried and quiet enough that only the table could hear, the same register he had used, precisely, she said, "Homo doctus in se semper divitias habe, Domini, quod stultus numquam intelleget." A learned person always carries their wealth within them, sir, which a fool will never understand. The table went still, not the polite stillness of a pause in conversation, the other kind, the kind that happens when something enters a room that was not supposed to be there, and everyone present understands simultaneously that the architecture of the moment has fundamentally changed. Garrett set down his fork. Hale's wine glass was halfway to his mouth and stopped there. Nora met his eyes with the exact same expression she had worn for the past 2 hours, professionally pleasant, calibrated to the millimeter. She allowed a single beat of silence to settle, like sediment after a disturbance. "I'll bring the cheese course in approximately 8 minutes," she said, "unless you'd prefer to move directly to his answer." She left the table without waiting for his answer. In the kitchen, she set both hands on the stainless steel counter and breathed, once, twice. The sous chef, a compact, economical man named Peter, who had worked beside her for 4 years, glanced over from the pass. "You all right?" "Fine," she said. "You've got the look." "I'm fine, Peter." He went back to his work without pressing. That was one of the things she valued about him. He understood the difference between concern and intrusion. What she did not tell Peter was that her hands were not entirely steady. Not from fear. She had stopped being afraid of men like Mitchell Hale, sometime around year 2 of her mother's treatment, when she had stood in a hospital administrator's office and made a case for an extended payment plan that would have made her old thesis supervisor proud. Fear was a resource she had long since reallocated. Her hands were not steady because she was angry. Not the hot, immediate kind. The other kind, the one that has been living in the body for so long it has started to feel like furniture. The kind you stop noticing until something nudges it and you realize it has never, not once, gone anywhere. She had been 23 when she deferred her program the first time. She had been sitting in the admissions office at U of T, across from a woman in her 50s who had the carefully compassionate expression of someone who has delivered this kind of news before, and she had nodded and signed the deferral form and walked out into a November afternoon so cold and clear it felt like an accusation. She had done everything, Artens. She had the grades. She had the references. She had the research proposal that her supervisor had described in an email. An email she still had, she was not sure why, as genuinely exciting. She had done everything correctly, and it had not mattered at all, because the things that collapse a life rarely care how correctly you've been doing things. She had learned in the years since that there were 2 ways to carry that. One of them made you smaller. The other made you quiet in a way that was not the same as being small. She chose the cheese course herself, which she was not strictly required to do but often did when she needed something to concentrate on. She selected carefully a aged Quebec cheddar from Ile aux Grus, a ripe Brie de Meaux, a firm Manchego, and arranged them with the dried figs and honeycomb in the pattern that the restaurant preferred. She did not think about Mitchell Hale. She thought about Thursday. She thought about whether the parking at Princess Margaret was better on the east side of the building or the west, and whether her mother would eat before they left or insist she wasn't hungry, and then be sorry about it. Table 7 received the cheese course without incident. Hale was speaking again. The dinner had resumed its motion, though the tenor of the table had changed in some way that was difficult to name precisely but unmistakable if you were paying attention, which Nora always was. Garrett kept glancing at her. The younger associate had not spoken since the main course. Hale himself had not looked in her direction. This was, in her experience, the way of it with men like him. The response to being caught off guard was not acknowledgement, but recalibration. He was deciding how to re-establish the geometry of the room. She could see it in the set of his shoulders. She was not particularly interested in what he decided. What happened next was not something she had anticipated or planned for, or in any way engineered. As the cheese course was being cleared, a woman approached from the far side of the dining room. Nora registered her peripherally before she registered her consciously. Late 50s, perhaps 60. Silver hair cropped close. the kind of unhurried way of moving through a room that signals either extraordinary confidence or extraordinary disinterest in what others think. A dark blazer, no jewelry to speak of, reading glasses folded in her left hand. Dr. Catherine Lau. Nora recognized her a moment before Dr. Lau recognized her. Catherine Lau was, among several other things, the founding director of the Lau Center for Genomic Research at the University of Toronto, a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, and the woman who had agreed, 7 years ago, to supervise Nora's graduate research before the deferral, before the second deferral, before the phone calls and the forms and the long negotiations with the university's graduate school office that had eventually, gently, resolved into nothing. Dr. Lau stopped. "Nora," she said. It was said in the way people say the name of someone they were not expecting to see, in a place they were not expecting to see them, with an expression that is trying to be neutral, but has not entirely gotten there yet. "Dr. Lau," Nora said, professional. Even the same tone she would use at table 7. But Catherine Lau was not at table 7. She was standing in the middle of aubergine with the expression of a woman who has just understood something she should perhaps have understood earlier. "You work here." It was not a question, but it was not a question either. "I do," Nora said. There was a pause, the kind of pause that contains several conversations at once. "I thought about you recently," Dr. Lau said. She said it directly, without the social scaffolding that the context might have invited. "We have a position opening, a research coordinator role. It's not what I originally had in mind for you, but it's a start, and the person we had earmarked for it took something in Vancouver." She paused again. "I wondered about reaching out. I didn't know how to find you." Nora looked at her. She had built, in the years of waiting tables and navigating the particular arithmetic of her life, a very effective internal structure for not feeling things in inconvenient moments. It was not the same as not feeling things. It was more architectural than that, a matter of load-bearing and timing. "I would be interested," she said, "in talking about that." "Are you free Thursday?" "Thursday. Princess Margaret, east side of the building. Parking Thursday afternoon," Nora said. "After 2:30, Dr. Lau said. "My office. Do you still have the email?" Nora thought of the email, saved in a folder she had never titled because naming it would have made her feel something specific about it. "I'll find it," she said. Dr. Lau gave a single nod, the kind of nod that closes a chapter and opens another in the same gesture. Then she continued toward her own table, unhurried, reading glasses still folded in her left hand. Nora turned back toward table 7. Mitchell Hale was watching her. She did not know how long he had been watching her. She did not know whether he had heard any of it, or understood what he had heard, or whether any understanding had accumulated in him at all. His expression had changed. There was something in it now that had not been there before, something adjacent to confusion, but less dignified than confusion. Something that was trying to find its footing in a landscape that no longer had the contours he had arrived expecting. Nora reached the table and asked if anyone would like to see the dessert menu. Garrett said yes. The others deferred to Garrett, as though this were a decision that required leadership. Hale said nothing. He signed the bill 40 minutes later, without the remarks that often accompanied the signing of large bills. No commentary on the service, no assessment of the evening, no performance of generosity or its absence. He left a tip that was exactly 20%, calculated to the dollar, as though by calculator. She suspected it had been. She did not think about this very much. What she thought about in the 40 minutes between Dr. Lau's departure and the end of her shift, and in the streetcar ride home afterward along King Street, where the city did its nighttime version of itself outside the window, was the email. The way it had read. The phrase, genuinely exciting. The specific sensation of being 22 and believing that the breadth of a person's curiosity said something essential about the breadth of their life. She still believed that. She had kept on believing it through all of the things that had tried to convince her otherwise, and there had been several, and some of them had been persuasive, and she had kept on believing you keep carrying something till, not because it is convenient, but because setting it down would mean acknowledging that you intended to leave it behind. Mutby was not going hit behind. She was going to leave it behind. Her mother was awake when she got home, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of decaf and a paperback she had read before and was reading again because, she said, the second time through a good book was the more interesting read. You finally knew what you were paying attention to. Nora set her bag on the chair by the door and stood in the kitchen doorway. "How was it tonight?" her mother asked without looking up. "Interesting," Nora said. Her mother looked up at that. Helen Callahan was 61 and had the kind of face that illness narrows but does not diminish. Her eyes were the same grey as her daughter's, and they held the same quality, cataloguing, precise, quietly amused at the gap between the world as it presented itself and the world as it was. Good interesting or bad interesting? Nora thought about Mitchell Hale's face in the moment after she had spoken, the moment of recalibration, the geometry of the room rearranging itself around something it hadn't expected to be there. "Both," she said, "mostly good." She sat down across from her mother. The sticky note above the sink said Thursday, 10:15 a.m. in her mother's handwriting, which was still precise even now, still the handwriting of a woman who had spent 30 years in a laboratory making careful records of careful things. Nora would add a second note tomorrow. Thursday, 2:30 p.m., Dr. Lau's office. The email in her saved folder finally named. She reached across the table and straightened the edge of her mother's paperback, which was leaning at a slight angle against the sugar bowl. "I might have some news soon," she said. "Nothing certain yet, but something." Her mother looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a woman who has learned, over years of difficulty, not to rush toward hope, but who has also never, not once, stopped recognizing it when it arrived. "Tell me," she said, and Nora did.